Bene, bene, buongiorno.
Buongiorno. And thank you for this chat. It's very interesting to hear various voices. We're now interviewing a few people that can have different perspectives on what's happening today, especially on the economic side of things. In these weeks, we've been talking a lot of how the state should be intervening on the economy, sustaining companies and sustaining people, but also to relaunch the economy. Have you thought of how much money a state should be putting in terms of percentage of GDP or whatever in the economy to sustain the economy and to relaunch it?
Well, the answer to that question is as much as necessary, but not so much as to destabilize things. And there's no specific number, nor can there be under such circumstances. The first task is obviously to control the epidemic and to make sure that everybody gets through this period, that they're kept safe in their homes as they need to be, that the supply chains continue to function, that the stores do not run out of essentials, and at the same time that the rest of the economy remains in essentially in quarantine until the chain of transmission is broken and it's safe to reopen. Moving more quickly than that is an extreme risky thing, as the public health authorities are telling us. And we're having that discussion in this country right now as people are pressuring the government to move in advance of actually having the epidemic under control. So that's the first question. Once one gets past that point, then the problem of reanimating economic activity has to be handled in a way which is conforming with public health requirements and with the change in conditions that will be present. That is to say, we will need a lot more resources put into the support of communities, into the support of the health system, into the support of people who have been, in dealing with the problem of debts that will have accumulated that will never be repaid. As a result of the fact that people don't have incomes to cover their mortgages, their rent, their utility bills, all this sort of thing, and to restructure the economy to deal with the fact that some activities, which were very prevalent before the pandemic, will not be coming back for a long time, if at all. We're not going to see the same level of airline activity. We're not going to see the same level of tourism. We're not going to see the same level of long distance travel of any kind. We're not going to see massive events, sporting events that we've seen with major cultural events, things that bring people together in crowds. These things will not be coming back until such time as we have both this pandemic under control and some ability to deal with, fully under control, and some ability to deal with the risk of future ones. And even then, we're likely to see major adjustments. So we have to think about the whole economy very strategically. The question of resources is not a simple question, but it needs to be adjusted to what the needs are.
So there's a lot of talking in these days and weeks about how to sustain the economy and how to get companies out of this period of quarantine. But what happens after this? We will have some sectors like tourism that will have a very difficult time in staying on the market. So which are the sectors, which are the investments the state should be doing to revamp the economy?
Well, as I said earlier, it's clear that we were under-resourced in public health. That's the first priority. And it's clear that we're completely vulnerable in the way we've been operating our supply chains, as we're not fully adjusted to the need to deal with people who in this situation. And the result of that, as you can see, and I think it's true in Europe, it's certainly true in the United States, that the grocery stores they're functioning, but it's extremely risky situation for both the workers and the customers, and supplies are erratic, and deliveries and an ability to handle things online are not adequately developed. All kinds of things that are going to have to be, as I say, restructured. So, for example, you can't go into any public building in China at the moment, and I don't think you will be able to for a long time, without having someone there taking your temperature. There are millions of people who will be required to maintain public health standards. Someone's going to have to organize that and pay for it, and that means the public sector. So we're going to see, one way or another, if we want to get through this in the long term, a reorientation of activity toward the support of the community, support of the common good, and we're going to see obviously less activity that people were indulging in that they may have enjoyed, that represented a high level of income, but that will not be so attractive to people, even if they could afford it. And we'll discover, of course, that many households will not be able to afford what they freely afforded 3, 6 months ago, because their financial position is going to be very much worse until we've dealt with that issue. And that's also going to take a long time.
So I saw an interview you gave. You were describing the difference from economic intervention by the states after the First World War and after the Second World War, and it was very different. Could you explain how this difference was?
Sure. After the First World War, the United States insisted upon being repaid for the materiel it had supplied to the British and the French, which then put the British and the French, and especially the French, in the position of demanding unpayable reparations from Germany, which then ultimately later on the United States made loans to Germany. Germany defaulted, and they had the rise of Hitler. It was a catastrophe which precipitated and prolonged the economic depression. After the Second World War, the inter-allied debts were forgiven and was basically treated as a common effort in which everybody put their common resources. And in 1951, the German debts and the Japanese debts were written down as well. So that brought everybody together in what became the Western world as a unified entity, which could grow for 30 years after that. And we're going to have to see something like the Second World War's approach, not like the First World War's approach, except that this time it's not just nations, it's every household. Everybody who's stuck in a position where they can't pay their rent or their mortgage, you absolutely don't want them on the street right now. And you can't hold them responsible for something which is completely outside their control. I mean, this is an epidemic, shut down everybody's employment, cut off their income. You can't, I mean, you can provide them with the money to pay their debts, but if you're not going to do that, you've got to forgive their debts because they can't be held responsible and they can't be put on the street without having catastrophic consequences for the whole community. We're seeing this already. There's supposed to be in the United States a ban on foreclosures and evictions, and landlords, particularly for renters, are aggressively ignoring it. It's not enforced. People are being put on the street. And of course, they're not only a tragedy for themselves, but it's a health risk for everybody else.
Mm-hmm. In Europe, we're talking a lot about the difference between ESM and Eurobonds. And in general, what is your thought on the fact that we should be doing debt or simply printing money at the time? Can you explain your view on all this?
The right approach here is to make the financial obligations as minimal as possible. Let's just put it that way. The best way is grants, essentially, because again, this is a common effort, and you're throwing the resources in that you need to do. So you need to finance this the way you would finance a war effort. The way we financed the Civil War, the Second World War. And if you issue bonds to finance it, they should be long-term, low interest, and held by the broad public. The ESM, of course, was created in order, it was a mechanism for imposing conditionality and austerity as a condition of a bailout that essentially benefited the banks in the case of Greece. And so it's an entity with a very dubious reputation. And my understanding is that what was on offer for Italy was not sufficient to deal with the economic question, sufficient to deal with basically only address the medical issues. And even if it did that, I'm not sure it did it adequately. So that's an important issue, but the whole principle needs to be rethought. And the best way to do that, what we proposed in the Greek situation, that should have been done, is that the European Central Bank would buy the bonds of, let's say, an entity like the European Investment Bank. In other words, basically, you're direct financing a common effort that is not on the state budgets of the member states, and that is adequate to deal with the emergency. That's where you need to be thinking. The old rules that this is all going to be, somehow, on the burden of one set of taxpayers or another. No, it's a common European problem, and it needs to be dealt with as a common European issue. And if there's not going to be a common European effort, then the point of Europe is really very much called into question. This is when you have to have. I mean, we're seeing this stress. I mean, I have to say, we're seeing this stress in the United States because the federal government has not stepped up to its responsibilities, and all the states are competing with each other. It's a terrible situation.
I saw that the liquidity problem is surely not a new problem, and looking at history is a good way of seeing what type of solutions we can have to deal with a problem that we have already had in the past. I saw in California that they applied in for the crisis of 2009 an interesting solution. You were talking about it in another interview I saw. Could you explain how that worked?
Well, a subnational entity, the state of California in 2008 or 9, and earlier in the Depression, it was done by many cities, the city of Detroit and I think St. Louis and others, is simply to issue notes, which are basically issued on the authority of the state. They're obviously denominated in the national currency unit, and they're accepted as tax for tax purposes by the local entity. So they circulate. They may circulate at a discount. They're retired as soon as things return more or less to normal. But they become a means of payment, which is an alternative to laying people off and cutting back on services. And this is what you really need to deal with, because you've got vital services that are, the police, the fire, the sanitation, the public safety, the public health services, education services, the public schools. You have universities, public universities, which if they're not maintained, will basically decay and won't be there. In the Depression, the state of Wisconsin, which maintained one of the great public universities, never cut the budget of the public universities through the Depression. And you can do this by essentially creative financial mechanisms, and those are they don't prevent you from. None of these places actually left the dollar zone, but they found ways to keep themselves financed and keep themselves operating, and not to have a complete breakdown during the crisis. And you've seen it also. You saw it in Argentina in the crisis after 2001, 2002. There were a plethora of local parallel monies that were issued, all basically, at a discount to the official currency, but they functioned. You saw it in the Irish bank strike of some years ago. Everybody issued IOUs to each other. So the monetary systems need to be flexible in emergencies. And one can't hold to the idea that some entity is going to dictate how much of a credit instrument you're going to need. You need what you need, and you need to produce it. You need to keep things.
So do you think this type of solution could be applied to Europe, or maybe to Italy?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's actually provided for in certain respects, so long as they're not general purpose currencies. We looked into this in the Greek case in 2015. But even if you needed a general purpose currency and you weren't getting what you needed, go ahead and issue it. Let them tell you that you can't do it, this is a situation where the primary responsibility of the national government is to its own population, and it's obviously that's the way the creditor countries of Europe are looking at it, and there's no reason why the debtor countries shouldn't take the same view. If you want to come to an agreement, come to an agreement. If you don't, you have to do what you have to do.
Mm-hmm. So in a more broader perspective, we will hopefully pass this period of COVID-19 before or later, and what will be left as major changes in society after this period, and what should we be preparing for this new era that is coming? Last week I was speaking with Rifkin, and he was calling it the era of resilience. Have you thought of what is going to happen and what is going to be there forever after this period?
Yeah, I've just been writing on this a little bit, along with my colleague Albena Esmanova in Brussels on this for something that's coming out from the Progressive International. And I think there's a fundamental choice. There's some grave dangers here. If things are not dealt with properly, what you're going to see is the people who have the resources are going to be, and I'm talking about hedge funds, vulture funds, the creditors generally, people who did well by shorting the market in January, and so on and so forth. They're going to be on the prowl to buy everything up on the cheap, and they're going to become the new landlords and the new owners of businesses that are selling out at fire sale prices, or businesses that have been bankrupt. And you're going to see a society which is fundamentally dystopian, in which the armies of homeless people, in which the problems of hunger and, of course, all the endemic problems of health and the collapse of life expectancy will follow from that. So if you don't want that, then what you have to do, and I like the phrase of the society of resilience, that's not bad, you have to have a restructuring and reorganization that puts the priority back on the sustainable community. And that means you have to provide employment, and you have to provide security, and you have to deal with all the precarities that have made life so difficult over the last decade. This is not just the pandemic, but the pandemic really brings it out into a serious, brings it out in a very, very sharp form. And fundamentally, when you do that, of course, you're pulling resources. You have to reset the distribution of income and wealth. Again, that's a post-war situation. That happens. It has happened in the past. It needs to happen now, in which you provide people with a chance to restart things on a different basis, in which you're actually using the resources that you have to provide for the needs that you have as a community. And of course, that means, of course, as well, you're going to see already you see a lot of things that, basically are not going, probably shouldn't come back in the same level. And we need to deal with the environmental question. We need to deal with the climate challenge. We need to deal with the energy transformation. We're going to see in the United States a major reduction in the production of fossil fuels. I mean, oil yesterday was you could buy a barrel and get $40, $37 in your pocket. I say, well, store it in the washing machine. But that was the situation. Those fields are going to be shutting down right away. I mean, very, very soon. And so we're going to see a need to have investments in renewables on a scale that we haven't seen before. We're going to need to have a society organized around lower levels of energy consumption and a higher, a standard of living that's based more on, I say, community. Much less commuting, much more working at home. That won't be a bad thing. We're taking advantage of technologies like the ones we're talking on right now. People are once they realize how much you can do with this, they will come in many cases to accept and even to prefer it in important ways. So we can build lives for ourselves, and it won't be like the life before the pandemic.
Well, thank you very much for this chat. It was
thank you very much. It's
very nice to have a view from the States, from Austin, I understand. Is that
yes,
correct?
Austin, Texas. Yep. Good luck to you.
Thank you very much.
Good luck to all my friends.